The classroom fell silent the moment the Threxian instructor scrawled the words on the central display. List 4 ways to disable a predator. 16 cadets stared at it. Species from 8 different systems, each with their own history of tooth, claw, toxin, or tech. The room smelled faintly of ozone and unspoken tension. No one moved. No one spoke. That is, until Riley, seated near the back, a reusable ice pack still strapped to his left knee from last week's gravity drill mishap, raised his hand. The instructor tilted his head in a way that meant either acknowledgement or the beginnings of a threat posture. Riley didn't flinch. Temporarily, he asked, or forever? A cough-like clicking came from somewhere behind the Naloth twins. One of the Vesk students leaned forward with wide, unblinking eyes. Ool, the aquatic medical observer assigned to monitor species with fragile skeletons, slowly turned his entire torso to face him, filter gills fluttering. The instructor blinked once. Clarify. Riley shifted, wincing as the knee brace pinched. Well, disabling can mean a lot of things. Like, are we talking about stopping it just long enough to escape? Or do you want permanent solutions? Silence stretched. One of the Naloth muttered something that auto-translated as, "What's wrong with him?" The instructor's eyes narrowed. "Proceed, cadet." Riley nodded, adjusted his sling pack like he was settling in for a lecture, and said calmly, "All right, 4 ways, but you asked." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. First method, vision disruption. You disable a predator's sight temporarily, with flashes, obscurants, or irritants. Permanently, if you damage the retina or optic nerve. We train with both options. Some scenarios call for temporary solutions. Others don't. The Gorthan student to his left hissed involuntarily, protective membranes sliding down over her eyes. Second method, joint dislocation. Knees, shoulders, even fingers. Doesn't matter how tough your opponent is, if you can't bend your limbs the right way, you can't chase, grab, or strike. Humans have extensive joint vulnerabilities, which is why we also learn how to exploit them in others. Third, he continued, adjusting in his seat, blood flow restriction, strangleholds, compression points, tourniquets if needed. You can knock someone unconscious in under 10 seconds if you hit the carotids. Recovery depends on how long the flow's interrupted. You cut it too long, you get ischemic damage. Brain, nerves, things start dying. There's a line you don't cross. We're taught where it is. A tall insectoid in the second row chittered quietly, tapping at its notes with an appendage that trembled slightly. Fourth method, neurogenic shock. A sudden hit to the spine or deep visceral pain can trigger it. The body just shuts down. Blood pressure collapses. You can drop a predator mid-lunge if you hit the right spot hard enough. Temporary? Maybe. Permanent? Depends on recovery, care, timing, and luck. Riley glanced around the room. The silence wasn't passive anymore. It had weight. Tension crackled under it like static before a storm. Each of these has a window, he said. An ethical threshold. A consequence. You don't go in blind, you calculate risk, severity, and recovery time. You weigh whether stopping the threat means ending it forever. We don't use these lightly. The instructor said nothing. Nor did anyone else. Ool's gills fluttered again. He blinked with both sets of eyelids, then slowly reached out and activated a data pad, beginning to record. Finally, a high-pitched chirp came from the back. The Halzari cadet raised a limb. Wait, you said strangleholds. That's restricting blood flow to the brain via external pressure? How do you practice that without killing each other? Riley offered a grim half-smile. Controlled environments, time drills. We train with pressure sensors and release cues. Usually 2 people watching and 1 running the hold. If anyone passes out, it's considered a failure of control. There were now 3 cadets taking notes. Ool was one of them. The others had retreated into varying stages of stiff postures, blank stares, or outright alarm. The Threxian instructor finally stood, his heavy exoskeletal frame clicking as he moved to the center of the room. That is not standard doctrine. No, sir. It's Earth doctrine. For close-quarters threat neutralization. Riley's voice didn't falter. Situations where we might not have weapons, or time, or a second chance. The instructor's manned, his jaw tightened. Cadet Riley, you will demonstrate. Riley blinked. Sorry, demonstrate what? Control. Your methods. I challenge you to a supervised combat exchange. There was a flurry of whispers, some inaudible clicks, others filtered through the class translator. Riley didn't answer right away. He stared down at his brace, slowly unstrapped the cooling wrap, and rotated the knee experimentally. It moved, stiffly, but without sharp pain. "Sir, respectfully, my knee's not fully rehabbed from last week's torque injury, and these techniques aren't theatrical. If we do this, I'm not faking anything." "Good. Then it will be educational." Uhl raised a hand well, a fin-tipped appendage. "Permission to oversee the exchange as a medical liaison?" The instructor nodded once. "Granted." Uhl gathered his kit from the wall, strapping on a biomonitor array, already muttering, "Unarmed, humanoid match, possible ligament strain, bone stress, maybe we pre-dose with anti-inflammatories, no. Wait for diagnostics." Riley stood, stretched his back, and tried a few test steps. The stiffness was there. He wouldn't be at peak agility. That, more than anything, made him frown. "Sir," he said, glancing at the instructor, "we'll go slow, controlled, one move at a time." The instructor gave the Threxian equivalent of a nod more, a shift of spine, and stillness of gaze. The sparring circle formed quickly. Chairs pushed back. Biomonitors blinked. Uhl stood ready at the edge with 2 injection kits and a skeletal scanner already active. Riley took his stance. Low, balanced. The instructor lunged. It was fast. Riley dodged, pivoting to the right, but his left foot slipped on the sealed floor. His brace knee held, but as he twisted to compensate, he over-rotated. A sickening pop came from his shoulder. Pain flashed so fast and hot it short-circuited breath. He dropped hard, landing on his right side directly onto a rib. The crack was quiet, but he felt it, deep, sharp. He rolled to his back, clutching his side with one hand, the other limp at his shoulder. "Stop." Uhl was already moving, scanning the readouts. Match terminated. Dislocation and suspected rib fracture. No further engagement. The instructor stepped back immediately, claws flexing, but not approaching. Riley's face was pale, sweat already rising. He didn't try to sit up. "It's out anterior, I think. Shoulder, not broken, just bad angle, ribs worse." Uhl was kneeling beside him, hands surprisingly gentle as he immobilized the shoulder. "You don't know if it's broken until imaging confirms," he said briskly. "Don't assume. I know what a fracture feels like. You also just tried to roll through a fall on a recovering knee. That judgment is suspect." Riley gave a short, pained laugh, then winced. "Yeah, fair." Uhl pressed a stabilizing patch to his side. "Do not move. You'll aggravate the intercostals and possibly pierce a lung if the fracture is deep." The instructor crouched nearby, observing, not gloating, just watching. "Your response to injury is calm." Riley didn't open his eyes. "Calm doesn't mean okay." "Understood." Uhl tapped his scanner. "We're transporting him. Internal damage check, confirm dislocation and depth of the rib fracture, possibly set the joint under sedation. He's not walking on his own." Riley exhaled slowly. "Good. Because I wasn't planning on it." He wasn't unconscious, but he wasn't fully awake either. The adrenaline had started to crash, and the pain had taken its place. Uhl stayed beside him the entire ride to medbay. By the time they arrived, Riley was shivering under the bioshield. The rib had indeed cracked. Not a full break, but a clean fracture along the 6th rib, anterior side. The dislocation was clear and deep. The humeral head had shifted forward and down, stretching the capsule and tearing minor ligaments. He'd need 3 weeks minimum to let the rib start healing, 4 to 6 for full shoulder recovery, depending on inflammation and reattachment. And that was if he followed rehab to the letter. Uhl studied the scans, then looked at Riley, groggy now from light sedatives and a pain block. "You break easily," he said softly, not unkindly. Riley nodded, eyes half-lidded. "Yeah, but we still train, because sometimes you get back up." For the first 2 days, Riley did nothing but sleep, grimace, and insist on not being hand-fed by the auto-feeder. The medbay, built to handle everything from exoskeletal resets to osmotic trauma, had only minimal experience treating human musculoskeletal injuries. Uhl hovered during most of it, not out of obligation, but curiosity. The aquatic medic species, the Lolthari, healed through directed bioelectrical pulses and nutrient baths. Bones didn't fracture, per se, Their entire physiology flowed more than it snapped. Watching a being function with internal scaffolding that could crack under weight was, in Ull's words, like watching a floating sculpture made of dried sapwood try to wrestle a tidal current. He meant it affectionately, probably. "Why do you still train this way?" Ull asked on the third day, gently adjusting the shoulder immobilizer while Riley grunted. "Your body clearly wasn't built for high-impact combat." "It wasn't," Riley said, jaw clenched as the brace clicked into place. "But we don't get to pick the threats." He was pale, not from fear, but from the slow accumulation of fatigue and pain. The rib made breathing feel like dragging barbed wire through his chest. The shoulder, though reset cleanly under sedation, now burned with every twitch, but he refused higher-dose analgesics during waking hours. "You're hurting more than you should," Ull said. "Your species' pain tolerance is high, but your healing is linear. You cannot accelerate through this." "I know." Riley didn't meet his eyes. "I just want to stay present." Ull tilted his head. "Why?" "Because pretending it doesn't hurt is how people re-injure themselves." Riley eased himself back into bed, moving like a man whose every joint had suddenly learned resentment. "I want to remember how this felt before I'm cleared to move again." Ull noted that down in his observation tablet under psychological anomaly, introspective resilience. Over the next week, the seminar class continued without Riley. In his absence, his name came up often. "What did he mean by 10 seconds to unconsciousness?" asked the Vest cadet. "Sure, that seems improbable." "Not if blood flow is cut," said one of the Neoloth twins, surprisingly. "I rewatched the footage. He was right." "There is a controlled threshold," Ull confirmed, standing at the back of the classroom during an ethics module. "I've been reviewing their trauma training protocols. Humans simulate oxygen deprivation to prepare for possible accidents in spacewalks, aquatic missions, or even enemy capture scenarios. They teach each other how to recognize the warning signs and avoid irreversible harm, but the margin for error is tight." That particular day, the instructor offered no challenge. Instead, he asked the class to review comparative anatomy of predators across 12 systems and identify shared physical vulnerabilities. Every cadet, without exception, included vision, joint articulation, and circulatory interruption in their report. By the second week, Riley could walk short distances under supervision. The rib, still cracked, was wrapped with a rigid exosupport to minimize expansion stress. Even with that, each breath was short, shallow. His shoulder had full passive range of motion, but nearly no strength. He could lift his arm with his other hand, but not on its own. Still, every morning, he tried, inch by inch, millimeter by millimeter. The Threxian instructor visited only once during that time. He didn't offer praise, or condolences, or even a greeting. He merely stood near the foot of Riley's bed and asked, "Would you have continued if uninjured?" Riley, his voice tight but clear, said, "No." The instructor waited. Riley added, "The point wasn't to win, it was to demonstrate. And if that means stopping after a mistake, that's what we do." The instructor left without a word. Ull stood nearby, watching Riley's face. "You're not angry at him," he said. "I'm frustrated, not angry." Riley closed his eyes. "The real fight isn't with the instructor, it's with what I thought I could get away with. My knee was still compromised, I knew it. I thought I could compensate. And that's a human thing? No, that's a me thing." Ull logged that under self-accountability, under duress, typical. By the third week, Riley had graduated to light therapy bands and controlled movement drills. That was when the real pain started. Until then, everything had been immobilization and waiting. Now, the damaged muscles had to be forced to contract. Scar tissue had to be softened, then challenged. The rib had begun forming new bone, but remained vulnerable. There were multiple setbacks. Once, he tried to reach too far and flared the shoulder capsule, setting him back 2 days. Another time, he coughed too hard while laughing at a bad joke someone sent via text and nearly fainted from the pain spike in his side. "Do you think we're reckless?" Riley asked Ull one afternoon during stretching drills. Ull was holding his arm, helping guide a circular motion. "No," Ull said. "I think you're fragile, but you refuse to be ruled by it. That's not always smart. It's not about smart, it's about will. You keep moving forward while knowing exactly how much damage you've taken. That terrifies some of the others." Riley gave a short breath, half a chuckle, half a wince. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I know. That's why it works. As Riley's therapy progressed, a few other cadets started visiting him, mostly in pairs or cautiously alone, as if he might snap his remaining rib with a wrong look. Schur brought him a Vesk protein paste he couldn't eat because it had trace chitin derivatives. One of the Neoloth left a bundle of scented feathers in a pouch, labeled, for calming, may induce hallucinations in amphibians, don't inhale directly. Even the instructor nodded at him in the corridor once. It was so subtle Riley thought he imagined it. But Uhl noticed too. You're being seen differently now, he said, reviewing a scan of the healing rib. Yeah, I noticed. Riley rotated his shoulders slowly, managing a wince-free quarter circle. They're not sure what to make of me. No, Uhl said. But I think they're starting to understand why humans aren't dangerous because you're strong. You're dangerous because you know exactly how much it costs to fight, and you'll still do it if you have to. Riley paused, considering that. I'll take that as a compliment. It's also a warning, to them. Late in the fourth week, Riley was finally cleared for modified class participation. He sat in the back again, this time with a shoulder support harness and a rib wrap beneath his uniform. The board read, Counter-incapacitation theory, adaptive resistance under stress. The instructor glanced at Riley before starting. Today, he said, we will discuss what happens when your opponent does not respond to disabling techniques, or when they recover faster than expected. Anyone have an example? A few cadets hesitated. Then Riley raised his good hand. The room shifted again, just slightly. Yes, cadet? Riley gave a tired, half smile. Well, I suppose one example might be a predator with enhanced stress hormones and a stubborn refusal to accept that their shoulder is no longer attached properly. That earned a few wary chuckles. Uhl, from the medical observation panel, recorded his own quiet note. Human combat resilience is not about ignoring injury. It's about calculating the cost, paying it knowingly, and remembering the receipt. Riley's return to the classroom was met with a peculiar silence, neither fear nor pity, but a cautious awareness. The others watched how he moved, careful, deliberate, slow when lowering himself into a chair, still guarding his left side. His rib had healed enough for normal breathing, but deep inhalation still hurt. The shoulder regained range, but not full strength. Light resistance made it tremble. The Threxian instructor began that day's lecture with no reference to the past month. We resume where we left off. Today's topic, moral thresholds in combat. When does disabling become cruelty? Every cadet straightened. The phrase was heavy, especially in a room where some species didn't even have a word for mercy. The instructor looked directly at Riley. Cadet Riley, since you raised the issue of temporary versus permanent, you may begin. Riley exhaled through his nose. His voice came out calm but steady, only with effort. We're taught to stop a threat with the least force necessary. But when adrenaline's up and everything's chaos, your body doesn't always obey theory. So we drill until reaction equals restraint. That's what training's for, building discipline into instinct. The Vesk cadet, Schur, raised a thick, scaled hand. Yet your species has used lethal force in many conflicts. How does that align with restraint? Riley nodded, expecting the question. We've learned the hard way. History's full of examples of when we didn't stop soon enough. It's why we treat every fight like it could spiral out of control if we don't check ourselves. You can't always undo harm, but you can prevent escalation if you think first. Uhl floated slightly nearer from his observation tank, eyes thoughtful. You mean you regulate violence through self-knowledge? Exactly, Riley said. If I know what I'm capable of, I'm responsible for when to stop. Pretending I can't hurt someone doesn't make me harmless. It makes me dangerous in the wrong way. The class grew quiet again. Even the instructor took a pause before speaking. Would you say your injury changed how you view combat? Riley tilted his head, considering. Yeah, getting hurt doesn't make you weaker. It just makes you more aware of the margin between intent and consequence. Uhl's gills fluttered, processing that. Explain? Riley leaned back carefully, avoiding a stretch that would pull the healing shoulder. Before this, I thought I understood restraint. But when your own body gives out mid-action, you realize how fine that line is. One wrong angle, 1 second late, and you go from demonstrating control to learning anatomy from the inside. The Neoloth twins murmured in their shared tonal language. The translator rendered it, The human treats injury as philosophy. Riley smiled faintly. Pain's a great teacher, if you survive it. The instructor crossed his arms. Show us your understanding, then. Not in combat, but in analysis. Choose one of the methods you listed before, and discuss the ethical limit. Riley thought a moment, then said, joint dislocation, temporarily disabling, usually non-lethal if you stop after the pop, but it's easy to misjudge. Too much torque and you tear tendons or crush cartilage. Recovery's weeks, sometimes months. You never risk that unless escape or defense is immediate. Otherwise, you're just inflicting damage because you can. Uhl recorded every word. A small, soft-voiced cadet named Yet, from a gas-breather species, raised a trembling limb. How do you handle guilt? Riley didn't laugh. You don't avoid it, you learn from it. Every soldier who's ever been in a real fight carries that weight. The question isn't whether you feel guilty, it's what you do with it afterward. That hung in the air long after the lecture ended. Over the following days, class discussions shifted. The Threxian instructor, once known for emphasizing dominance and precision, began to highlight judgment and proportionality. Aliens who had once marveled at efficiency started questioning motive. How much is necessary became the new mantra. Riley, meanwhile, returned to therapy. The shoulder was almost stable, but full strength would take at least another 3 weeks. He could lift his arm to chest height, grip a training rod, and even jog short distances. The rib had fused well. Pain came only with hard exertion. Uhl monitored him during drills. You are pushing your range faster than expected. Are you compensating with your back muscles? Yeah, Riley admitted, sweating through his shirt, trying not to overuse the deltoid until it's ready. Feels like my scapula's doing all the work. Correct, Uhl said approvingly. But moderation. If you tear secondary fibers, your progress resets. Riley grinned. You've been reading human rehab manuals again. I find them contradictory. Half advise patience, half glorify struggle. That's pretty accurate, Riley said, breathing heavier now. We argue with ourselves even about healing. Uhl blinked twice, the Luthari version of amusement. Later that week, the instructor organized a group discussion exercise. Hypothetical hostage scenario. Minimal resources, predator pursuing from behind. Each cadet had to propose a non-lethal neutralization strategy. When it came to Riley, all eyes turned. He tapped the table once. Tripwire substitute. Force the predator to overextend a limb, then immobilize it, but don't finish the joint. Pain stops pursuit faster than mutilation, and recovery is possible if medical care is available afterward. The instructor nodded slowly. You'd spare a predator that would kill you? If I can, ending something should be the last choice, not the first. Even at risk to yourself? Especially then. Otherwise I lose what makes the fight mean something. A murmur of confusion passed through the class. The idea of valuing morality over victory made little sense to half of them. After class, Uhl followed Riley into the corridor. The human's movements were smoother now, almost normal, though his arm occasionally hung stiff. You equate mercy with strength, Uhl said. Riley looked thoughtful. Maybe not strength, just clarity. You can't call yourself civilized if your first instinct is destruction. Yet you studied destruction so thoroughly, Uhl said softly. Because pretending it doesn't exist doesn't make it go away, Riley replied. That evening, as the Academy's twin suns dimmed through the high viewport, Uhl joined Riley in the physical therapy wing. The human was practicing assisted pull motions with resistance bands. The medic checked his readings. Ligament integrity, 86%. That's ahead of schedule. Range of motion, nearly full. Still weak as hell, though, Riley said. I can't even lift a full field pack yet. Then you will not carry one until cleared. Riley gave a dry chuckle. You'd make a great coach back home. Unlikely. My species heals by floating in nutrient pools and humming. Discipline is not our strongest trait. Then maybe that's why you're good at reminding me to slow down. Uhl seemed to consider that. I am learning from you too. The notion that limitation can coexist with willpower is new to me. We heal easily. You heal through effort. It makes your progress meaningful in a way we cannot replicate. Meaningful's one word for it. Exhausting's another. Uhl's gills fluttered, a silent laugh. Perhaps both are true. 2 days later, the Threxian instructor requested another practical demonstration, not combat this time, but procedural restraint. how to subdue an aggressive opponent without injury. Riley agreed, under the strict rule that he would not engage physically beyond guiding motion. The demonstration unfolded slowly in the sparring ring. The instructor acted as the aggressor, moving with exaggerated speed. Riley stepped aside, redirected, guided him to imbalance, and lightly pressed at the elbow joint before retreating. He explained angles, body mechanics, and why pressure without pain could still control an adversary. It ended without incident. The room, however, felt transformed. The aliens saw a human who had been broken and rebuilt, not through bravado, but method. They began to understand that Earthborn danger wasn't just physical, it was intellectual, ethical, calculated. When class dismissed, the instructor approached him privately. "You've altered this curriculum," he said, "not through defiance, but consequence." Riley wiped sweat from his temple. "Guess that's one way to teach." The Threxian inclined his head. "Your kind terrifies me, cadet. You break, you bleed, you doubt, and yet you still return. That is power my species has never needed to develop." Riley met his gaze, steady. "Maybe that's why the coalition works. We all cover each other's blind spots." Uhl later recorded a single line in his medical report before submitting it to the coalition's training board. Human resilience is not defiance of injury, but cooperation with it. By the 6th week, Riley was back on full physical clearance, though full came with caveats: no hand-to-hand combat drills, no weighted packs over 15 kilos, and no sudden lateral shoulder movements. He still couldn't throw a punch with his left arm without feeling the ghost of pain flare through the joint, but he could lift, sprint, and run basic maneuvers again. More importantly, he could breathe deep without the rib barking. The morning of his first official re-entry into unmodified combat coursework, the training field looked different. Someone had laid down a foam mat where gravel usually bit into knees. The weighted dummies had color-coded joints painted in earth red. And a side bench had been moved into shade, stacked with hydration pods and 2 clearly labeled med kits, one marked with a new sticker that read, "Earth, check for internals." Riley spotted Uhl standing beside it, scanning the field as if evaluating structural integrity. "You redesigned the whole setup?" he asked. Uhl didn't look away. "The previous design was optimized for exoskeletal species. Yours is not." Riley shook his head. "I'm fine. You don't have to baby me." "You're not being babied," Uhl replied evenly. "You're being accommodated. It's a survival strategy. You taught me that." Riley smiled and stretched out his shoulder, still cautious, but more fluid now. "Well then, let's see how far survival gets me today." The drill was a multi-species coordination exercise, team maneuvers, low-contact sparring, extraction protocols. Riley was assigned a squad with Shur, one Neoloth twin, no one could tell which, and an anxious Halzari cadet who jittered constantly unless underwater. Despite the odds, the squad functioned well. Riley directed from the middle, compensating for his still recovering side by anticipating movement and guiding others with short, specific commands. "Twist its hip, not the leg weight shifts inward. Go for the off-balance, not the impact. Don't crush the neck, it's a simulation." Each call wasn't just about success, it was about restraint, and the other cadets listened. It wasn't just Riley's methods they respected now. It was that he understood why they mattered. After the simulation, the instructor, who had remained oddly quiet throughout, called the class to gather under the shade dome. "This seminar began as a standard combat theory course," he said, his voice steady and low. "It became something else." He turned toward the center where Riley stood, sweat-soaked and panting, shoulder lightly twitching from overuse. "We asked for methods of disabling predators." One cadet asked, "Temporarily or forever?" That question changed how we think about force. A pause. "We have updated the syllabus, effective immediately." There was a flicker as the new training protocols appeared on everyone's holopads. Unit 1, Combat Triage and Threat Analysis. Unit 2, Anatomical Disabling Methods, Reversible and Irreversible. Unit 3, Ethical Combat Decision-Making. Unit 4, Interspecies Fragility Index Calibration. Unit 5, Psychological Aftermath and Self-Auditing. But it was the addendum at the bottom that caught everyone's attention. Instructor's note: "Do not ask open-ended combat questions in presence of Earthborn personnel unless prepared for a philosophical debate, an anatomy lecture, and possibly a medical emergency." A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the group. Riley glanced at Ool, who was already logging the moment into his tablet. He looked up. Happy? The medic asked. Exhausted, Riley said. But yeah, I think it was worth it. Ool swished water through his secondary gill canal, the Lil Thari equivalent of a pleased sigh. So what's next? Riley shrugged carefully. Finish the seminar, survive the next fitness test, maybe go 5 whole days without getting injured. Aspirational, Ool said, deadpan. Later that evening, back in the mess hall, a few cadets gathered around Riley's table. Not for questions this time, just to sit, to share stories, to talk. The Vest cadet Schur recounted his species' coming-of-age combat rituals, interrupted only when Riley asked how they prevented ligament tears with 6 knees. The Neoloth twin offered Riley a flexible combat wrap designed for multi-jointed limbs and said, "We recalibrated it. Might help your shoulder during strain. No ceremony, just quiet offering." Even the Halzari cadet, twitching slightly under the dry air conditions, piped up, "Our medic says you have high scar tissue density. That's admirable, sort of." Riley took it all in stride. His laugh was still careful, not too deep, but it came easier now. Across the room, the instructor watched without comment, arms folded. The next day, the simulation module began with a surprise twist. Hostage extraction under low gravity, with disorientation, gas, and intermittent lighting. Perfect conditions to highlight weakness. Riley went down hard on the second maneuver. Not due to injury, just a misstep on the uneven incline that flipped his center of gravity. The fall wasn't dramatic, but the silence after it was. A younger cadet rushed forward, hand outstretched, worry etched on their too smooth face. "You okay?" Riley blinked, took stock, and nodded. "Yeah, just bruised something I didn't know I had." Ool's voice came calmly through the comms. "No fracture spikes on biofeed. Proceed with caution." The cadet offered a hand again. Riley took it. That was the moment the instructor chose to speak. "This is why we train," he said. "So when we fall, we do not stay fallen. We learn, we adapt, we protect each other." The cadet who had helped Riley looked confused, but I thought the objective was neutralization. "It is," the instructor said, "but so is knowing when not to neutralize, and when to heal instead." At the end of the seminar cycle, the cadets gathered for final debrief. The coalition board representative appeared via holo, a tall, crystalline being who viewed the cohort through refracted eyes. "Your cohort performed above baseline," it intoned. "Unexpected syllabus evolution noted. Recommendation: incorporate Earth combat ethics modules into all future mixed species instruction." Riley tried not to look too smug. Ool did not succeed. When the seminar formally closed, Riley stood with Ool on the outer deck of the habitat ring, watching a slow-turning starfield beyond the transparent shield. "You ever think," Riley said, voice quiet, "that the point of all this isn't to make us better fighters?" Ool hummed low in his throat. "Yes, I think it's to make us better choices, for when fighting isn't the answer." Riley nodded, then slowly turned to head inside. "Also," he added over his shoulder, "next time someone asks me for 4 ways to disable a predator, yes, I'm gonna say, Step 1. Don't volunteer for demonstrations. Step 2. Always ask if the predator has claws. Step 3. Have a medic on standby. And Step 4. Try talking first." Ool paused. "And if that fails?" Riley grinned. "Then we do it the hard way, but we know it's the hard way." As the habitat lights dimmed for artificial dusk, the line between predator and cadet, between threat and ally, felt just a little thinner. Not erased, not forgotten, just better understood. The syllabus had changed. So had they.